This past Friday, we had two students in Tech Sales Ascension break into the industry and get their first job. And I'm really excited today to speak with Chris, who has past experience in real estate, in project management, and also in sales, but not directly in tech sales. You're gonna learn about his frontline experience and what it took to break in, and also how he stood out from others throughout that process. And I'd also add, as a side note, many of you have had questions about our platform. We recently launched a free course that you can access in the description below that gives you an idea of our coaching style, gives you free value and free tips on tech sales, and ultimately shows you some of the features that our platform has to offer if you're considering Tech Sales Ascension. But nonetheless, thank you, Chris, for your time, and congratulations again on breaking in. I hope everyone watching gets as much value out of this as I did.
Chris, thanks for joining, man, and congrats again for breaking in. Would love to tap into your experience for everyone watching who's trying to break in or in a similar situation. You know, I mentioned you specifically transitioning careers. You've had a couple different careers as well before breaking into tech sales. So maybe let's start there, kind of paint the picture of where you were, and then we'll kind of start to get towards why tech sales.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've actually spent the last couple of years in sales, but not in a tech sales role. So that was really interesting for me to kind of make a sort of a career change at this point in my life. Not like I'm completely starting over, because I do have some of that skill set, but it's been, I think, 9 years since I've been on a job interview. Like, LinkedIn wasn't really a thing. I think it was around back then, but it wasn't obviously as integral as it is to applying now. So there was definitely a lot for me to learn, even as someone who's experienced in sales, like how to go about, prospecting to find the right contacts, and to really find those people and get in front of them to try and make the interviews happen. Because just having a resume and applying it feels like you're just throwing it into a void, so to speak.
Yep. No, and I'm curious on that note too. You know, you mentioned 9 years at the place you were previously. I mean, it's a pretty drastic change. A lot of things to shake the rust off of, whether it's resume, creating LinkedIn, all these different things, right? So what ultimately, whether it's personal dissatisfaction or desire for upside, like, I'm curious the thought process and why tech sales, right?
Yeah. So for me, a little bit of both, a little bit of personal, a little bit of the upside. I actually relocated about 7 months ago from New York City to North Carolina. And I was working at that place for, as you mentioned, like almost 9 years. And so it's not really a remote centric organization. So that was something that I had talked about with my wife before we moved down. I was like, I'm probably going to have to get a remote job, because certain parts of North Carolina are very happening for tech, like Raleigh, Charlotte. I'm in Western North Carolina in a town called Asheville, which is it's known for beer, not tech sales. So I was like, okay, I'm probably going to have to get a remote job when I go down there. So that was sort of part of the master plan. And obviously, the market is not amazing right now, but I think if you find the right company, if you're the right candidate and you can put in the work, the opportunity for growth is still there.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say you even got the Palms Hawaiian shirt. So it sounds like you really embraced the remote culture, man. It's good to see. No, but I was gonna ask, like, what, obviously, like, this was a very significant leap for you. Like, what were some of the challenges, like, when you were trying to break in, or like, did you have any challenges? Obviously, like, 9 years before, or 9 years of like a gap before you had interviews and whatnot. Again, like, what were some of the challenges that you had to overcome? And yeah, I think that'd be super valuable for the folks out there listening.
Honestly, I think, like most things in sales and most things in life, a lot of it was mental. Being at the same place for so long, and then starting to go through everyone's LinkedIn profiles of looking through, an SDR manager or account executives. I'm like, well, these people have been working here for 2 years, 10 months, 2 years, this and that. And now they have these, really fancy sounding titles. I don't know. And I'm like, I've basically had the same title, even though I've been working quite hard for the last couple of years. So that was something I was kind of aware of, but I never really looked into it that much. So that, psychologically, I think created a little bit of a barrier for me. And I was like, oh, wow, maybe people are going to look at me and think, oh, he's been at this company for so long. Maybe it's like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, that sort of thing. So that was something that I really had to address pretty much in every interview, like why I'm looking to leave, what kind of skill set I have, like things I've had to learn over the years, even though I've had the same job title. So kind of getting ahead of some of those questions and those concerns was definitely a big thing for me during the interview process. But yeah, I think largely psychological.
Like, what were some of the objections that you got? Like, and how did you overcome those objections? Was it mainly the fact that you hadn't been in tech, or was there something else?
A little bit of both. And I kind of have an odd background. So I sold some tech products, but not like a traditional SaaS company. So I had a little bit of that experience that I could spin and that I could speak to. And I think for the kind of roles that I was going after, I think that was enough for most folks. But yeah, pretty much everyone had the question, hey, you've been at this company for so long, like, why are you looking now? So, you know, after you get asked the same question like 3, 4 times, like, okay, I have to have a good answer for it. And, you know, some people actually remarked at some point after the first half a dozen interviews, they're like, you're very well prepared. And I'm like, yeah, I've been asked this same question like 7 times. So again, it's just thinking it through and having a good response, and obviously the meaning behind it was there. So it was just a matter of kind of dialing it in, and some of it was practicing on my own, and then some of it was just live fire after doing it a couple of times. That it just came off better, I think.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And one of the things, again, kudos to you. Like, I noticed you really attacked the interview process and had tons of different interviews as well.
Mm-hmm.
So any thoughts there? What worked well? Was it worth getting as many interviews as you had, things of that nature?
Yeah, I think it definitely was, because as I mentioned earlier, I've been at the same company for 9 years. So I said to myself, I'm like, I'm just rusty. I'm probably going to stick my foot in my mouth, even if I don't realize it. So you know what, even if I should say the first maybe 2 or 3 that I had, I wasn't really too keen on the company, but I'm like, you know what, if I'm going to make a mistake, let me just go through the process. I'd rather make a mistake at a company I'm not super excited about than one I'm really excited about. So by the time I got to that company that I was really excited about, I think I'd worked through most of those issues and you know, did good enough for them to give me an offer. So
no, it's great feedback. And again, like, one of the things that we emphasize is getting a lot of those interviews. I mean, certainly if you get a great opportunity early on, I mean, yeah, sure, take it, right? But in doing so many interviews, did you notice, I guess, one, how many did you have? And then were there any themes that you were able to pick up on, or things that it prepared you for maybe more than just, you know, a standard video to prep or role playing with a friend or whatever it might be, right?
yeah, no, great questions. So I would say probably about a dozen different companies I interviewed with, give or take. And some of those were just the first round, and some went all the way through and I didn't get them. So pretty varied. And I would say, as far as things that I picked up on, kind of like what we mentioned earlier, that, you know, I definitely got the question every time of, hey, you've been at this company for so long, like, why are you looking to leave now? Or what is it that you're looking for in your next role? So pretty much everyone asked that question. And I think just with my age and my experience, I mean, it's you know, they would obviously they would absolutely ask that. So that I got pretty comfortable with answering over and over after a couple of times. Beyond that, I would say, as far as like preparation and experience, I mean, I approached it just like any other sort of sale. I mean, I was very excited when I got the first 2 or 3 interviews just to have them. And there was one company that I was really excited about, but again, just my background in sales, knowing, hey, this is not a granted, like, you've got to keep going, even though you've got 1 interview scheduled for today, like, you've been doing this for an hour, put in 4 more hours and like try and get more interviews. So just taking that approach, and yeah, just kind of taking the questions as they come.
No, that's awesome. And you mentioned you had to kind of get used to some of the same questions and kind of prepare in advance. Like, what were some of the questions that would come up a lot, and maybe even going a step further, like, how did you overcome them? Like, again, I'm sure you probably don't remember everything, but I think maybe even like giving the folks out there an idea of like how to tackle these questions would be extremely valuable, because obviously you crushed it. So
Yeah. So questions that came up, I mean, the real obvious one, basically the first question everyone asked is, you know, tell me about yourself. And with that, I didn't focus on too much personally. I feel like if you were to divulge too much personal information, it's not necessarily to your benefit. You could accidentally let something slip that could be not used against you, but maybe disqualify you for a silly reason. So I try to keep that to a minimum. I would mention to most folks that, oh, I'm originally from New York City and I relocated 7 months ago from New York to North Carolina, because that's relevant for why I'm looking for the role. And it's like a little personal. So that I kind of slipped in there. And then as far as other questions, again, what we talked about earlier, everyone kind of wanted to know, like, why now? Why are you looking to transition out? You've been with the same company for so long. And, you know, why their company specifically? Like, what about the product, or, you know, what about them was interesting to me? So that was really just a matter of doing a little bit of research on their website, maybe watch a couple of short YouTube videos just to make sure you actually understand the product and understand the company and actually be excited about it, right? So those were kind of the big things I saw pretty much in every interview.
yeah, no, that's awesome. And like, I think research is a huge aspect. Like, something that we've been kind of indulging in recently is like trying to figure out how to use ChatGPT in that workflow. But did you rely on YouTube, or did you rely on any other outside sources, or was it just like kind of the, I don't even know if it's called the good old, old school method? Because yeah, but did you rely on like Google? Like how, like can you take us through that process of like, how did you prepare for these interviews? How did you make sure that you showed up to them prepared, and that you could actually present and talk to them?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we could edit this back, but if you guys want, I could show you like the stack of paperwork that I have just to show the camera, maybe just to like let people know like this is the work that I put in to make this happen. Like it didn't sort of just happen.
Yeah.
I mean, do you want me to grab it? It'll take 5 seconds.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. Let's
Okay.
do it.
I mean, I don't know if what I can show you right here. These are from all of the interviews that I had. I mean, there's probably like 30 pages here of just my resume in the back, but then maybe, I don't know, hopefully you can't see names and information of companies, but for every company that I had in a first round interview, I basically had a list of questions, and some of them were the same, but some of them were specific to the company. So it was really important for me. I wanted to hit on, because you don't know how much time you're going to have to ask questions at the end. So I wanted to make sure that I at least asked questions, particularly like the second and third round, that demonstrated like I researched your company, I researched the person that I was talking to, and that like I'm asking them sort of an open-ended question to see what they're looking for in a candidate, and then position relevant experience that I have to address that. So I kind of want to make sure at the very least that I'm touching on those 3 points. That was super, super important for me to kind of be well-rounded in terms of maybe some of the other folks who maybe just ask questions about the job or about the salary. Like you want to demonstrate that. But to your question earlier, Chris, about like what resources that I used, definitely YouTube. I would keep it pretty high level. Like if it's the first round, I didn't want to spend a ton of time because you don't know if it's going to go anywhere. So maybe I'd watch 5 minutes of videos. Most companies have, dedicated teams that pitch and explain what their product is in a minute, right? So that's pretty easy. I did use ChatGPT for kind of investigating the competition. Sometimes that's a little harder to get out of just Googling, like who is the competitor for this company, but ChatGPT made that really easy. So then I would make a list of that, and that would also be like something that I would ask during the interviews, like, hey, who would you say are your biggest competitors? Is it, and then I'd pick like the top 3 or 4 that ChatGPT gave me. And then I'd ask like, do you find yourself losing a lot of business to these, to these companies, or what differentiates your product from their product? That's also important too, because if they can't give you a good answer to that, it's probably not a good product.
Yeah, those are great questions, actually. I should probably be writing these down for myself. Oh, that's great. That's great. No, that's interesting. And like I'm curious, even throughout that process, even taking a step back, like, did they ask you any questions that kind of like threw you off a little bit? Like, I think there's always going to be some sort of like tricky questions or trick questions, try to like kind of make you stumble a little bit. Was there anything in particular that they asked you, or were they pretty chill throughout the process?
No, it varied pretty widely between what you get. There were some people that you're speaking to, and these managers, they're clearly just on their couch in a t-shirt and they're just kind of like hanging out. And then some of them, they're in front of like, their bannered background, and they're wearing a button-down shirt. So it was kind of all over the place. I think it really just depends on the company. I think by the second or third interview, I wasn't really totally taken off guard. I mean, obviously the stuff we go over in the course kind of laid a lot of the groundwork. So I think most of the big ones I had, pretty much ready to go. I'd have like index cards that I kind of drilled just to sort of rehearse and practice. So yeah, after the first few, I don't think I was really taken aback by anything.
No, that's cool. And yeah, so you had all these notes and you had these index cards. Like, did you just have them available as you were going through the process, or like, did you have a system? Or I know some people like to put up a Google Doc like in a different tab. But yeah, how'd you manage to do all this stuff? Did you have it?
No, I mean, again, like basically by the third or fourth interview, a lot of the same questions. So I didn't really need to look at anything. The only thing that I kept in front of me, which I don't think is cheating, and like, I've had to hire people or been part of the hiring team, my old job, people bring in a notebook, they have questions. So like, I would just have it by my keyboard. I might have one of my little lists here of questions that I was going to ask. And I would say like, hey, I have some questions for you. So like, nobody's upset about that. And obviously as you're talking to the HR person or the director, like they're typing notes. So I don't think it's a big deal. It's not like I had it off to the side and I was trying to read something verbatim, like I'm really experienced because I've done, right? Like that's going to seem a little awkward and inauthentic. But I think just having notes in front of you is, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Well, and I would love to tap into your, I mean, I know we've talked about the initial research phase, but credit to you, you had multiple offers as well. Ultimately ended up taking a position at a great company, but also had other offers on the table that from a strict dollar amount actually, appeared to be higher, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's validity in both routes. Could you speak to how you decided between those two companies and what kind of tipped the scale for you?
Yeah. So super, super grateful that, obviously I was able to have those opportunities and folks referenced me and after I'd outreach to them. So that was really great. I think even though I did have an account executive position at another company, I wound up not going for that one, not because of anything the interviewer said. Actually, everyone I spoke to at that company was really amazing, very friendly, like really great rapport with the interviews, really liked it. But the thing that kind of tipped the scales away from them was they had a lot of layoffs in December. So like 4 or 5 months ago, like they fired hundreds of people. And, I did ask about that during the interview. I brought it up. And, one of the folks had mentioned that it was just sort of done overnight by upper management without consulting like the sales managers. So it kind of just happened from the top down. And then obviously that didn't give me a warm and fuzzy feeling. And then I dug a little deeper and found that they had actually laid off hundreds of people the year prior. And I think it happened like 1 or 2 years before that. So I'm like, okay, this is kind of a pattern. So that's ultimately why I wound up not going with that company, even though, again, I'm sure it's a great company and I'm sure there's great people. But the other company I wound up going with, it was a slightly different technology that I was more interested in. It got a great vibe from everyone that I spoke with. And also, I think the upside when I do make it to that account executive position is going to be higher. So I think that'll offset the little bit of, the money that I'm leaving on the table, so to speak, by not taking that other account executive role.
But yeah, I mean, that's great feedback. And, one of the things we've said too in numerous videos otherwise is, when you have that longer term view, I think you're in a great position to make a decision like that. And I totally agree. I think based on looking at that company, I know we had a conversation, that upside was really there. And I think you're in a great spot, even though on paper, it's not the same dollar amount on day one. But that being said, you make a career transition, you have some exposure to sales, you've got the bits and pieces around the industry, ultimately breaking in. What advice do you give to someone who's breaking in or looking to make that change into tech sales?
I would say just discipline and consistency. This is probably, maybe there are other jobs, but this is the only job that I could think of where the act of getting the job is the job. So like the way you're going about prospecting, trying to get in touch with folks, to try and get that interview, to try and close it. I mean, that's what you're going to be doing day in and day out if you get this role. So if you don't like this process, if you don't like doing it, like maybe give a long, hard look in the mirror to see if you really want to do sales, because this is what you're going to be doing like day in and day out. So that's one piece. And again, as I mentioned, the consistency, I would try and do a certain amount every day after work. And then I would try and just basically make it my full-time job on the weekends. But, if you tell yourself you're going to do 5 jobs every night after work and maybe you only get to do 2 or you only get to do 3 because you just had a long day, or maybe even miss a day here and there, like that happened to me. Like you can't beat yourself up. You can't get discouraged. You just pick yourself up and you keep going.
No, Chris, really appreciate it. And for everyone watching as well, Chris let us share his LinkedIn in the description below. So definitely, if you want to connect, you have questions for him as well, feel free to reach out. Chris, thanks again. Congrats again. And if there's anything else you want to share, now's the time. But thanks as always for your time.
Yeah, no, I mean, thanks to you guys. Thanks to both of you for making the course and making yourselves available. It's super helpful. I had mentioned this in the course, but I think it's worth saying here, I do have a sales background. Like I've done a lot of sales. I'm sure I could have gotten here on my own, but I think it probably would have taken me like 4, 5, 6 months instead of 6 weeks. So, a lot of value for me. I really appreciate it. And, definitely, not to make it sound like a pitch, I would wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone that's watching. But yeah, I guess to anyone who's considering making the transition, making the jump, just there's 2 things that are really important. I mean, time and pressure, right? So you just got to keep grinding at it, and it's just going to take some time. So if you put in those 2 ingredients, things will happen for you. It definitely will happen. But just try and stay positive, try and stay consistent. And I mean, that's all I can really say, I think.
Yeah, well said. Well, appreciate it, Chris. And for everyone watching, thanks for your time. We'll see you on our next video.